I'm not anti-lesbian. I am pro-trans and also pro-lesbian.
Sorry, but no. If you buy into the belief that woman is a political identity, then you're already lesbophobic by default. I couldn't find the video, so I can't watch the entire thing, and I don't know the entirety of what he said. However, for those of you who don't know, lesbophobia is where misogyny and homophobia intersect. All lesbians are female homosexuals. This is the established definition globally. Saying otherwise is lesbophobia, and it's lesbian erasure. If we take that statement to its logical conclusion, you believing that woman being a political identity means lesbian is also a political identity, and it's not. It's an observation of homosexuality in females. The attempt to redefine the word lesbian does come from a place of misogyny, and it does come from a place of male privilege. It's heterosexist, and it's conversion therapy rhetoric. The first thing that they teach you is that male people and female people are ultimately made for each other. This is validated when it's said that male people could also be quote-unquote lesbians. All of those things are connected. It's about you choosing whether or not you accept that reality. Gender ideology doesn't apply to lesbians. And whether or not you believe we exist, there are women who are exclusively attracted to other women, i.e. members of their same sex. We're not a political identity, we're not non-men, and we're not attracted to people's perception of themselves. We're simply homosexual females. We are females who are attracted to members of our same sex.
The idea that women's country would be without flaw or discourse was quickly disproven as separatist lands across the United States crumbled from mundane issues, such as interpersonal conflict and financial mismanagement. Today, many lesbians and radical feminists seek to create the community of the pre-2000s, and just as fashion repeats itself, so too do the many arguments that filter through the community, of which transgender discourse is not new. As noted in other videos, at the 1973 West Coast Lesbian Conference, Robin Morgan promised, "I will not call a male she. 32 years of suffering in this androcentric society of suffering have earned me the title woman. One walk down the street by a male transvestite, 5 minutes of his being hassled, which he may enjoy, and then he dares to think he understands our pain? No, in our mother's names and in our own, we must not call him sister." Today, much lesbian discourse centers around what can be boiled down to one issue: gatekeeping. After all, it's difficult to trust when a woman says she's a lesbian, especially in a climate where men call themselves women, and women who support the delusions of men over the rights and safety of other women, and perhaps most annoyingly over the truth, are pretty common.
Glad a lot of lesbians stop equating liking penetration to liking men. Men are not the only ones that can give you or provide you penetration. Not only that, but there are several ways to get penetration because it does not only have to involve a dildo. But let's take it a step further and let's stop equating having a penis to being a man. Trans men exist and they have vaginas. Trans women exist and they have penises. Also, there are over 23 chromosome pairings. Gender is not as cut and dry as you think. It's very complex. There are millions of women with XY chromosomes and there are millions of men with XX chromosomes. Trans women should not be left out of lesbian conversations, especially when that includes receiving or giving pleasure. I believe that when that happens, lesbians won't be so condemned for their sexual practices. There are prosthetics today that you can put on and it will make you feel like that thing is a part of you. What I'm trying to say is that I think it's okay for lesbians to blatantly say they like dick. You just don't want it from a man, and trans women are not man.
While trans rights activists and allies alike like to ruminate on the evil cis lesbians who are transphobic and hate trans people, new research by Just Like Us has found that lesbians are the most likely of the whole LGBTQ+ community to be supportive of trans people. Lesbians are the most likely to say they know a trans person, 92%, and also the most likely to say they are supportive or very supportive of trans people, at 96%. That's compared to 89% of LGBTQ+ people overall, and just 69% of non-LGBTQ+ people. However, anecdotally, I've found that it is lesbians who are married and thus are no longer in the dating pool or subject to unwanted amorousness who tend to be the most accepting of gender ideology. It is also important to note that this study does not specify on the sex of trans-identified individuals, nor what acceptance and support really means. In a study which had 958 participants, it was found that 87.5% indicated that they would not consider dating a trans person, with cisgender heterosexual men and women being most likely to exclude trans persons from their potential dating pool. The study authors raised concerns that interested partners would be invalidating to trans-identified individuals for being interested in their sex and not their gender identity. As they note, it is possible that such interest will effectively misgender potential dating partners by prioritizing sex assigned at birth over gender identity. Example, a lesbian woman being interested in trans men but not trans women. This data is likely not entirely accurate, given that, for the majority of analyses, gender was assessed inclusively, such that trans men were included with cisgender men and trans women were included with cisgender women. However, it was found that those identifying as queer, bisexual, or two-spirit were most likely to indicate a willingness to date trans individuals, at 55.2%, followed by gay men and lesbian women at 23.9%, and finally, heterosexual men and women at 3.1%. Now, the researchers of this study were surprised that participants continued to select primarily a willingness to date trans-identified people who aligned with their sexuality rather than based on gender identity. For example, lesbians would date trans men but not trans women. Those who were not interested in dating any trans-identified people were labeled exclusionary. They noted that a heterosexual man or lesbian woman's expected response would be to select a trans woman given their general interest in dating women. Additionally, it was found that queer or bisexual men, women, and non-binary individuals were least likely to have an exclusionary response and were most likely to provide congruent responses. Heterosexual men and women had the highest rates of exclusionary responses, while lesbian women had the highest rates of incongruent responses. In simpler terms, sexuality is still very much based on sex, and many lesbians are still interested in women who identify as men by virtue that they are still women. The incongruency the researchers speak of, wherein lesbians are interested in trans-identified males, may be attributed to a misidentification of sexuality, wherein bisexual women believe that they are lesbian because they use gender identity instead of sex to define their sexuality.
It's actually not that complex. There is one group of people for whom it's not that important. They're called bisexuals. For everyone else, it is important. Sexual attraction, romantic attraction, is not possible unless they are the sex of their sexual orientation.
Otherwise, the result of pressure to conform to gender identity instead of sexuality, out of fear of community exclusion, should not be understated. Women are socialized to be people pleasers, and the takeover of the LGBT community by gender identity, as well as the centering of gender identity as being more oppressed than that of sexuality, has created an environment where many lesbians and gay men are pressured into being with the opposite sex under a progressive homophobia.
I've actually made this jelly for you.
What they don't know is that the jelly has a secret ingredient.
Oh no.
Salt.
This task gives us insight into how children conceal emotions like disgust and show empathy.
Yeah, it does smell good.
Smells good. What do you think?
Is it sometimes okay to tell a little lie?
Never. A little one. Just say never, okay? Never.
5-year-olds are able to tell white lies to avoid hurting someone else's feelings, and girls are more likely to do this as they may be more aware of social norms of politeness than boys.
It's amazing. Do you like it? It's a bit salty, but I like salty. I felt sorry for her.
Why?
Because we don't really like her jelly.
Now for the boys.
So what do you think? How does it taste? Is it okay?
Why is there salt in this?
Do you think I should give it to the other kids then?
You can take it home. I told her it was not good.
Why did you tell her that?
Because it wasn't good.
What about her feelings?
She was okay with that.
Often, this is compared to the dissolution of the barrier of interracial dating, another example of false equivalence to the fight against racism. However, as Sonia Sadha notes, the growing number of interracial relationships is the sign of a less racist society, but these relationships are the healthy byproduct of broader shifts in societal attitudes. not of activists hectoring people to be more pluralistic in their choice of partner. This pressure to conform to gender ideology can best be explained via the concept of the cotton ceiling, which refers to the glass ceiling, wherein women are prevented from upwards mobility in a corporate world, but in regards to the cotton of a woman's underwear, and the inability for men who identify as women to get inside that underwear. The idea that it's bigoted to not be attracted to trans-identified males is not a fringe belief. As Sada notes, the chief executive of LGBT charity Stonewall recently said in relation to a BBC story about lesbians being pressured into dropping their boundaries, "Sexuality is personal, but if, when dating, you are writing off entire groups like people of color or trans people, it's worth considering how societal prejudices may have shaped your attraction." Last week, a QC on the Bar Council's Ethics Committee defended the concept of overcoming the cotton ceiling, the offensive idea that a lesbian's lack of desire for trans-identified males is rooted in bigotry rather than their same-sex attraction, and compared it to initiatives to promote racial integration in post-apartheid South Africa. The pressure to include trans-identified males in a female homosexual's dating pool is spurred on by bisexual and heterosexual women who call themselves lesbians because they are in relationships with men who call themselves women.
I finally figured out why it can feel a bit ickier to say I'm a lesbian as opposed to saying I'm gay.
I'm not being mean. This take is not the take that you guys think it is. I feel like they're trying to rationalize, internalize lesbophobia. Now, you don't have to use the word lesbian, it's fine, but saying I'm a lesbian makes you feel icky. Yeah, it's just funny because it's always the word lesbian. I feel like we shouldn't be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
The erasure of the word lesbian is a reflection of the continual battle to wear down the boundaries of women. After all, the idea is that lesbians just haven't met the right man, are lesbians because of an inability to find a man, and the concept that sexuality is actually really fluid are nothing new. The result of this pressure to allow men in some way, shape, or form to have access to lesbians is a validation of the continuation of the scrutiny lesbians face from both within the community and outside of it to prove their sexuality. For example, the argument that since lesbians include dildos or phallic objects in their sex lives or are attracted to butch or masculine women, that they are secretly heterosexuality or attracted to men is a long-standing argument.
Can anybody explain to me why there are so many lesbians that are okay taking a strap? Basically, a plastic penis. But as soon as you have an organic one, they're like, I can't do that. I have genital preference. And they're like, no, it's just general preference. I'm like, no, it's because you literally see me as a man. It's because you see me as a man and you're transphobic. Why? That doesn't make any sense to me. If you can take the thing that's not real, why can't you take the thing that's real? I mean, I'm not going to force anybody to do that. That's weird. But, like, I think you got some stuff to figure out.
However, the use of phallic objects in lesbian sex is greatly overstated, and can be tied to the presentation of lesbians in lesbian porn, which is geared towards a heterosexual male audience. In reality, lesbian sex lives are not like that. In a study with 1,216 lesbians and bisexual women, it was found that 98% of the whole sample gave a history of sexual activity with women, 83% within the last year, with a median of one female partner in that year. 85% of the sample reported sexual activity with men. For most, 70%. This was 4 or more years ago. First sexual experience tended to be with a man at a median of 18 years old, with first sexual experience with a woman a few years later, at a median of 21 years old. Oral sex, vaginal penetration with fingers, and mutual masturbation were the most commonly reported sexual practices between women. Vaginal penetration with penis or fingers and mutual masturbation were the most commonly reported sexual activities with men. These findings have been replicated, as another study conducted in Mexico found that the preferred sexual practices with other women were external genital stimulation with fingers, internal genital stimulation with fingers, and oral genital stimulation.
Hi, I just wanted to say that it is my business what goes on in my sexual life, and you have no idea if what I use during it. Alright? For that, you'll have to ask people such as your mother. 2, I'm sorry you're having bad sex. Like, wow, do you just, like, sit there and stare longingly into each other's eyes? Come on, like, wow, okay. I need TERFs to understand that, like, this is not the lived experience I've had either. Like, maybe you're out of touch with the lesbian community, but we're a bunch of little freaks here. We're a bunch of little nasty freaks, and it's fun. So, maybe you're just not being invited to the right parties.
This is not to say that lesbians do not use insertable sex toys, but arguments have been ongoing for generations about the role it should play in one's personal sex life, as some assert it is an oppressive tool of the patriarchy, whereas others proclaim that it is a practical means of expressing lesbian, bisexual, and queer women's sexuality. While the presentation of dildos within a lesbian sex life is often presented with a sense of spectatorship, similar to how making out with a woman in a bar or sex between women which caters to a male gaze is more acceptable and even promoted than that which is not, it is also true that penetration can be pleasurable for women. The inclusion of a male organ-shaped toy presents criticism from both lesbians and heterosexuals about hidden desires for a male partner instead of a female one, or that women who have sex with each other are poor imitations of heterosexuality. But it should be noted that a sex toy is made of silicone and used between women. It is no more a penis than a gummy worm is a worm.
I know another trans girl made a post about this, but it's been bothering me, so I want to make a post about it. I am a trans lesbian, and every time I hear a lesbian talk about their dislike of mascara wands, it hurts me. It hurts trans women. It makes us feel unwanted. It makes us feel not wanted in the community, period, because there is an equation almost every time in one of these posts of mascara wands to lesbianism. I'm not saying you can't have a preference. I'm saying don't talk about it publicly. I'm saying don't post about it on Maine to get 100K likes. When you post about it publicly, it hurts us. It makes us feel unwanted. It makes us feel unsafe. It makes us feel discarded. We are a group constantly defined by our genitals, and when you hate on us, hate on those body parts, it feels disgusting. Just make this place safer for us. That's it. Make it comfortable.
The suspicion of lesbians as lesser women can also be tied to discourse surrounding butch femme roles. The emergence of lesbian culture first emerged after World War II, where butch women were expected to appear and behave in a manner resembling masculine images of the period, while femme women expressed an aesthetic that exaggerated the feminine imagery popular at that time. This was partially for safety, as being able to be mistaken for a heterosexual couple could prevent being the victim of a hate crime, but also as a safe replication for a dynamic that was most familiar in a deeply patriarchal context.
My entire life has been trying to put a positive spin on what it is to be butch. Media has always portrayed us as fat and stupid, and we beat our wives, we cause fights we drive trucks. And part of being butch is the dress, is the look. People had to recognize what you were the second you walked in that bar. In those days, it was very important. This would have been, for me, in the early 70s. I went into, believe it or not, it was called the Red Balls. I had a fake ID, I was 16 years old. Some big old monster dagger butch sitting at the bar. Turned around and went, "Hey, baby Butch!" at me. And I was like, "What? Come here!" So I went over to her and she kind of, Al was her name, and she sort of raised me. Butches do everything. We cook, we clean, we have to be really good at everything. That's our thing. And of course, you have to take care of your lady, your femme.
As noted by Levitt et al. In Gender Within Lesbian Sexuality, Butch and Femme Perspectives. During the second wave of feminism, these butch-femme dynamics were reconceptualized as mimicking the patriarchal relationships the feminism wished to replace. Butch women were thought to be aping men, while femme women were accused of objectifying themselves. During this era, most butch and femme women adopted the androgynous aesthetic of the feminist culture, as a preferable choice to facing exclusion from the feminist lesbian community. The political lesbianism movement was founded, under which lesbianism was not so much based upon sexual desire as upon motives to eradicate gender oppression. Lesbian desire was predicated upon the partner's sameness and the absence of gender and power differences associated with gender. In the 1980s, the Butch Femme culture began to emerge in select communities as women reclaimed these identities. Butch Femme cultures then were contextualized within a feminist framework, coexisting with feminist androgynous lesbian cultures, and allowing greater flexibility in constructing gender identities. This revived Butch Femme sexuality was not a predominantly political enterprise, but was motivated by desire, with romantic and sexual relations constructed around the sexual tensions created by gender difference. And so here, the view that lesbian sexual attraction was a mimicry of male attraction to women, and thus dirty and predatory, grew, spurred on by political lesbianism, which sought sexless female partnerships.
Political lesbianism was a movement that came out of second-wave feminism. There's a lot to criticize about second-wave feminism. We can just save that for a whole other video. Political lesbianism is the idea that women, regardless of their sexual orientation or who they are most naturally attracted to, can actively choose not to commune with, not to have relationships with, and not to have sex with men. Political lesbianism comes from the idea that women who are in relationships with men are complicit in their own oppression, partially by way of sharing resources with their oppressor. The people that we're in long-term committed romantic partnerships with, they benefit from our existence in their life. They benefit financially as we share finances. They benefit in terms of care. We might cook for them, we might have children with them, we put work into the same house that they do. Political lesbianism says if you are going to do that with anyone, why would you choose to do that with men? It's not unlike any marginalized group deciding not to be in relationship with their oppressor. For example, Black, Indigenous, and people of color could be attracted to white people. They don't have to date them. That is a political choice. Furthermore, the constructs of identity, behavior, and orientation are not the same. We often collapse them, but they are not the same. Our orientation is who we are most naturally attracted to. Our behavior is who we engage with sexually and romantically. Our identity is how we understand ourselves. Often, the three line up, and often they don't. It is completely possible and normal to be oriented one way and to identify another way. I am oriented bisexually in that I have the capacity to be attracted to anyone, and I have been attracted to all genders. If, according to the history of political lesbianism, literally straight women can practice political lesbianism and identify as political lesbians, why can't I, as an actual queer person who has not dated men in like a decade? I can't use the term lesbian. Do you know what political lesbianism is? Please do not come for my degree. Don't. Instead of leaving comments on TikToks when you don't know what you're talking about, try reading a book.
The core concept of political lesbianism is that sexuality is a choice, and thus radical feminists can choose to become lesbians. This differs from celibacy or femme identification, where when women make a choice to exclude men from their dating pools, but do not deny their capacity for attraction to them. Lesbians tend to oppose the idea of sexuality as a choice, given that otherwise, it depicts homosexuality as a preference, and thus the oppression that homosexuals face as having been a choice based out of pickiness, rather than an ability to be attracted to the opposite sex. This is an interesting counter to the reality that lesbian women have often been excluded from feminist movements by way of minimizing the role lesbianism plays in a woman's life, or by denouncing lesbians as being part of the class of women at all.
When we learn about second-wave feminism and lesbian history, it's often a weapon used by TERFs, which is very unfortunate because it is very important to understand in order to understand gay rights history and feminist history. So I'm going to tell you all about the Lavender Menace. In the 1970s, there was a movement called NOW, the National Organization for Women. At the same time, the Gay Liberation Front was starting to gain traction. But the leader of NOW, Betty Friedan, basically said that the plight of the lesbians was going to distract from the plight of women as a whole. And she coined the term Lavender Menace. So a lot of prominent lesbian feminists, including author Rita Mae Brown, were understandably pissed off and decided to strike back. A group of women wearing Lavender Menace t-shirts disrupted the Second Congress to Unite Women in New York and took the stage to demand that lesbian rights be brought onto the table. The actions of the Lavender Menace were able to open up the floor for more discussions about gay rights within the feminist movement. And this was an important moment in the development of intersectional feminism as we understand it today.
Betty Friedan's declaration of lesbians as a lavender menace and the resulting exclusion of lesbians from mainstream feminism based on sexuality is reflective of the long-standing views of lesbians as wrong or failed women. Freudian theory argues that lesbians attempt to overcome castration by assuming a masculine role in life and or masculine appearance through clothing, gesture, substitution, and centers around the desire to be a man as a result of being a woman who either has never relinquished or seeks to recover her repressed phallic sexuality or out of a desire for revenge. The centering of female sexuality and identity around male figures is not an uncommon perspective, as public perception of lesbianism often views partnerships between women as due to a lack of or hatred towards men. The blurring of the boundary of female exclusive sexuality due to the use of queerness or misidentification has also protected the use of gatekeeping within the community. The need for gatekeeping, just as is necessary for women-only spaces, has led to many arguments over the validity of the term gold star, referring to women who identify as lesbians and have never had sexual relationships with the opposite sex.
Okay, how does it feel to you if I say I identify as a lesbian, but I am attracted to men here and there, but I solely identify in my heart with being a lesbian? There's a lot of discussion going around lately that it's harmful, hurtful to the lesbian community or the gay community to identify as a label that is meant to be attracted to one specific gender, but also be attracted to another, yet call yourself that label. What I want to say about that is the whole point of being in the queer community for me is that we can feel free to identify how we want to identify. And if I have people and friends around me who identify as a lesbian, however, sometimes are attracted to a man or attracted to someone who's non-binary, and that technically doesn't fit the label of a lesbian, but they feel like they are a lesbian and the definition for them really makes them feel empowered and feel like themselves, then who am I to tell them that you're not that because, oh, you liked this person or like you find this person attractive? It doesn't really make sense to me. I think that we should all just accept people for how they want to identify. If they're being kind and they're being true to themselves, then isn't that what the queer community is all about? Otherwise, we're kind of just then doing what non-allies do by trying to stick us in a box and make us feel smaller and less free. So overall, I just think gatekeeping a specific label is so not on the right path of where we want our community to be. And it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be curious and wonder and be scared even that how people identify going forward might change the way we perceive certain labels, but that's just what comes with growth and kind of like people changing and figuring more things out and feeling probably more free to identify the way they want to identify. So anyway, that's my ramble. Let me know your thoughts in the comments because I'm genuinely curious about what people think, but please keep it kind because if you don't, I will just delete the comment.
Hermeneutical injustice refers to the inability to describe one's experiences due to a lack of language to use. For example, a woman may experience sexual harassment her entire life, but will be unable to accurately discuss those experiences due to a lack of specificity. Instead of being able to communicate that she is being harassed due to her sex and expectations placed on her because of it, she can only describe her difficulties in the workplace as being bullying, mean, or uncomfortable. We currently live in a society where the internet has allowed for the spread of information at a rapid speed. As a result, more and more women are able to make sense of their own experiences and to come to the conclusion that they are lesbians. The role that religion and culture play in sexuality also cannot be overstated, as in most religions, sex is presented as a duty a woman must endure, not enjoy, to keep her husband happy. Many heterosexual women describe their relationships and marriages as a chore, or with general dissatisfaction, making it difficult to determine the difference between an ability to be attracted to men and the average dissatisfaction a woman may face in her relationships.
Oh my God, I completely remember the anxiety I would feel when that motherfucking clock was ticking, right? So all women know when we haven't had sex in a while. because we feel you vibrating in the air about when's it going to happen again, when's it going to happen again. We feel that, we know, and we don't want to for whatever reason. But I remember when my babies were born. So I was a stay-at-home mom for about 3 years or so, and my kids were born 16 months apart. And I remember when they were about 1 or 2, I went to the doctor because I had zero sex drive. And of course, I went to the doctor, right? Because there was something fucking wrong with me if I didn't want to bang my husband, who let me rot constantly alone with children, gave me no help, everything was on me, I got no sleep, on and on and on and on. But I obviously had something medically wrong with me because I didn't want to fuck. And so anyway, I go to the doctor, and he said that, yep, probably your hormones are messed up, but you need to put it on a calendar and make sure that you have sex with him at least every 10 days. And at the time, that felt like a relief. It felt good that I was allowed to go 10 days, medically permission from the doctor. I could go 10 days at least in between. Let that sink in. This was in the 2000s. This was not in the 1920s that this happened. This literally happened less than 20 years ago. And I did that. I started paying attention, and guess what? Turned out my husband had his own internal clock going already. He already knew how, like, what the average was and whatever. He couldn't remember jack shit to do around the house, but he knew how often we were having sex. And yeah, but that's the thing. Women feel the vibration in the air, and it starts causing us anxiety because we're the ones who have to regulate your emotions. And the number one way you regulate your emotions is through sex. You need to come up with some other outlets, guys.
The rise of language to describe these experiences have also been muddled with misunderstandings of what sex and sexuality really are. As Adrienne Rich notes, in compulsory heterosexuality and lesbian existence, the extension of the assumption of female heterosexuality is the frequently heard assertion that in a world of genuine equality, where men were non-oppressive and nurturing, everyone would be bisexual. Such a notion blurs and sentimentalizes the actualities within which women have experienced sexuality. It is the old liberal leap across the tasks and struggles of here and now, the continuing process of sexual definition which will generate its own possibilities and choices. It also assumes that women who have chosen women have done so simply because men are oppressive and emotionally unavailable, which still fails to account for women who continue to pursue relationships with oppressive and/or emotionally unsatisfying men. With how actual lesbianism is demonized, and thus pride in having never explored sexuality with a male is super demonized and often presented as par for the course in mainstream lesbian depictions, gold stars are often bullied for being proud of their sexual history, or, in turn, are strict in their definition of lesbian, to an extent which becomes misogynistic, such as suggesting that a woman is unclean for having touched a man at all. This does come alongside a rise of pretenders, women who view lesbianism as a purchasable aesthetic rather than as an actual sexuality, and thus call themselves gay, but would never actually sexually interact with another woman. The rise of gender ideology and queer theory has presented sex as being divorced from sexual attraction, or, truthfully, the act of sex itself, as genitals and a person's sex are considered less important than gender identity. Sex is often presented as being possible while excluding actual genitals and sexual content, and fewer young people are actually being sexually active in comparison to that of older generations during this period of their lives. The lack of life experience and the centering of theory over experience, along with misinformation, means that many women are unable to understand their own experiences in order to accurately label them. Additionally, the presentation of bisexuality as the only progressive sexuality, though often hidden behind proclamations of gender over sex, adds to this confusion. Lesbian discourse is an interesting topic due to the inherent politicalization of the lesbian sexuality, whether or not lesbians want it. Because misogyny is viewed as a baseline for normalcy, any perspective which instead centers women is considered radical, strange, and political. Thus, any decentering of men from women's lives, even as men center other men via their desires for respect and power, cannot be separated from lesbianism itself. The discussions of how to maintain a boundary that seems to be attacked from all sides will likely continue on, at least until women's liberation is truly achieved, whenever that is. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I probably could go on for ages about lesbian discourse over the ages, but it's interesting reading up on some vintage and smaller print essays and collections and seeing what people said back in the 70s, 80s, 90s about this kind of thing. And there's always been a battle over, like, you're not lesbian enough, you're not this enough. But the way that I see it, quite simply, is that you really have to remember that socialization is a hell of a drug. A lot of people don't have the words to even know what homosexuality is. I think a lot of us are very, very lucky to have grown up in the Western world, to have been in a situation where we can actually, know what a lesbian is. But even so, like, I grew up in Georgia. I've mentioned this many times. Georgia is a southern state. Religion still plays a heavy role. My dad's Catholic. One of my friends came out as bisexual in 8th grade, and my response was, ew, that's gross, even though I had a massive, massive crush on her. And it took me years to stop trying to force myself to change. I wanted nothing more than to be a straight woman because that would mean my parents would accept me and I could fit in. And even though I knew that I was not attracted to guys in any way, shape, or form, that pressure to conform is still there and it's still very strong. And if we can understand how, for example, in Islam, a woman doesn't necessarily have a choice to wear the hijab, because if the choice is wear the hijab, everyone thinks you're going to hell for being a sinner, that's not really a choice. And the same thing applies for being a lesbian. Even if technically you live in a country where it's accepted, it's still very, very hard to come to terms with. And that's why we're seeing so many young lesbians, especially masculine or gender nonconforming lesbians, turn towards transitioning, because it offers an easier solution than having to deal with the fact that being a lesbian is inherently political and difficult to live with. Anyhow, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm sure someone will think that I'm not really a lesbian after this one, but we'll see. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!